Welcome to Biztech's CEO Conversation Show, the show where we engage industry leaders to share insights into how they run and grow their businesses across the region. Now, today our conversation is with Lennard Yong. He's the Group CEO of Tricor Group. Now, Tricor is a leading business expansion specialist in Asia. Now, thanks for coming on the show, Lennard.
You're welcome. Thank you, Brian. Very happy to engage with you today. We've heard a lot of good things about Biztechasia, so we're very honored to be your guest today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Lennard. Now, can we start by giving us an overview of Tricor Group, what you do, and a little bit about your history since you were started in the year 2000?
Sure. Let me keep it short and succinct. So we were born in the year 2000, which is shortly after Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US came into force, which encouraged a lot of the Big Four accounting firms, and probably at the time more than Big Four, to divest on a lot of the, let me say, corporate and miscellaneous services to avoid audit conflicts. So in 2000, a major Hong Kong bank acquired the operations of Deloitte, and then subsequently they took on EY and PwC. And the three of those firms were the foundation of Tricor, meaning the three corporations. And then from there, they developed, through acquisitions and partnerships, a network of corporate services providers across the Asia region. So Tricor today is 21 years since that inception. But our business obviously goes much longer than the year 2000, because in many of the cases, we've had clients who've been with us for several decades. And but the formal age of Tricor is since 2000. In short, we're professional services. We provide incorporations, accounting, payroll. So basically anything that businesses are looking to set up across Asia, to move their operations, to set up an opco activity outside of their home markets, they would use Tricor.
So, and that's literally an end-to-end turnkey service.
Yes. So the one thing, Brian, that we don't do is audit. And because of that, there's a lot of things that Tricor can assist without entering into the conflicts. Second, our focus is on administration capability. So for clients who don't know what they want, we would suggest that they go and talk to a strategy consultant. But for the clients who already know what they want, if they want to set up an operations in Singapore, they've got a clear business plan, they just need to get it done fast and efficient, then they come to Tricor.
Okay, so you're the execution guys as opposed to the strategy guys.
Correct. We do more work, and we got more people, hands and feet on the ground, helping businesses to set up in ASEAN, in China, in Japan. So we don't do a lot of consulting work. We're not an expert in creating PowerPoint. We tend to be better in solving real client problems. So entering Vietnam, trying to get a license, trying to get your factory, trying to get the relevant approvals, trying to hire your financial controller, entering into China, trying to navigate with all the provincial rules, Chinese social labor regulations, and so on. That's what we do.
So in other words, one of the key things is because many of your customers are very large customers, you are literally the go-to person when they want to come to Asia, because simultaneously, as you correctly pointed out, if they've already clearly identified either internally or via a consulting firm, their strategy for Asia, and it could be entry into 5 markets and doing 5 different things, from a manufacturing plant to services to partnerships. Basically, exactly. You can help them execute.
Exactly. So examples of which a few years ago, we assisted Tesla to enter into the Japanese market and set up their operations in Tokyo. We also assisted a major US investment bank enter the free trade zone inside Shanghai. So they were already in China, but then applying for a specific license in the free trade zone. We help some tech companies from the US come into ASEAN as well. We've done a lot of solar energy companies, over 20 solar energy companies entering into Vietnam. And typically what they'll do is they may have operations in Canada and the US, but then we will help them set up a holdco in Singapore, and then with an opco doing a lot of the solar panels and so on in Vietnam. So we do a variety of things. There's never a dull day. It can be as simple as assisting your clients with a payroll, to clients saying, hey, we want to move our corporation lock, stock and barrel from Tokyo to Singapore, or from Singapore, we want a market entry into China. It really varies, but we're at the end of the day the execution expert. So we deliver services and value by getting the job done, rather than writing about the job in a theoretical concept. We don't do that.
Now, Lennard, GDP growth in Asia continues to outpace the rest of the world. How has COVID-19 impacted this growth and confidence of companies wanting to come into Asia?
Yeah, so I think you raise a very good point. I think, in the context of Asia, because the markets and the governments here have been far more proactive in tackling some of the challenges with COVID and so on. So we've had, I would say, in general across Asia, somewhat relatively better control. In the markets such as China and so on, things have almost come back to normality. So if you look at flight radar, just to see planes moving around, you see tremendous volumes around the northern part. So anyhow, whilst GDP in general have improved, I really want to draw your attention, Brian, to something that's more specific, which is FDI, foreign direct investments. And over the 19-20 year period, because of COVID, there has been globally a substantial drop in global foreign direct investments. In fact, minus 42%, or about 859 billion in less flows. But in Asia, that has suffered less than the rest of the world. So I think, I echo your comment, but I do want to stress that there has been somewhat of a little bit of a challenge, I think, around foreign direct investments. And as you know, in the Asian emerging economies, foreign direct investments going to Thailand, going to Vietnam, going into China, is really core to the economic growth long term.
Right. But so how is that a long-term trend in terms of that downtrend, or do you see a rejigging, especially because of the fact that just before COVID, in fact, there was a very strong indication that companies, because of the trade spat, that companies were actually moving operations and having a China plus one strategy. Have you benefited from that? Have you seen a change in that perhaps happening?
So I think that there are several angles to that question. I think firstly, in terms of foreign direct investments, a lot of the ASEAN emerging countries have been a beneficiary of a lot of global change. China, if you look at the southern region of China, over 50% of the GDP today can be characterized as services, tech services, financial services, etc. And because of that, naturally, you find that the cost of setting up traditional industrial manufacturing is somewhat a disadvantage today, because labor markets costs have risen. Right. So I think, it's less of COVID and less of what we're facing today, but it's just a natural evolution in the global supply chain that a lot of these things migrate ultimately to other regions outside Asia. So yes, we've seen for strategic purposes establishing a lot more activities, operations in ASEAN. But then on the other hand, we still see substantial amount of foreign direct investments going to China, but more so around the services side of things.
Now, one of the things that's happened, especially in the last couple of months, is really that narrative has changed. The conversations initially were around COVID. Now they're around the global recovery story. What do you think are the key focus areas for companies, large companies that you deal with, as they seek to stabilize and grow their businesses to take advantage of the uptick?
I'm very optimistic. About a month ago, I spent some time in the media in Singapore and Malaysia talking about the RCEP, the Regional Economic Treaty. I think that's tremendous. The size of that potentially exceeds, in dollar terms, the USMCA and probably exceeds the European Union as well. And I think it's really critical because you've got the 10 ASEAN nations plus the 5, and that's the Japan, Korea, China, together Australia and New Zealand. So it's common to have a country to country having a bilateral trade agreement, but it was very hard to encapsulate, especially the 3 large economies in North Asia, meaning Japan, China, and Korea. And as you know, those are mega industrial powerhouses. And so that, I think, will usher in the next decade of growth, because today corporations can take advantage of better tariffs, and as well there were substantial incentives and guidance for a lot of economies to plan ahead for the digital economy. So for the first time, RCEP actually articulated certain strategies around e-commerce, around digital footprint, so your digital signatures and so on. So these were stuff that may have been, very advanced, let's say in Singapore, in US and so on, but now it's permeating right across ASEAN. And also I remember, I think Malaysia at the same time as well introduced its policy concept, MDEC as well. So I think there's general enthusiasm, and my sense is that with the economic improvement, and plus some of the long tail of RCEP, my sense is that business is going to be really good. Corporations will start to review their value chain, the supply chain structure, and they will have a vastly bigger ecosystem to play with over the next decade.
And also, Lennard, to echo your sentiments, COVID has been an accelerator for digital transformation and adoption across the region. Because as you said, countries like Singapore were ahead of the curve, but many other economies, especially their SMEs, the likes of Indonesia and Malaysia, really were kind of behind the curve, and the SMEs were very slow to adopt digitization. COVID has changed that whole thing, and RCEP, I think, as you said, the long tail of RCEP may be really that accelerator.
Yeah. So indeed, I think with digitalization, if it was an optional extra for most corporations, I think came sometime around Chinese New Year last year, if you recall, that suddenly became accelerated and corporations had to move rapidly. Here at Tricor, we support over 1,500 listed companies in Singapore, in Malaysia, and in Hong Kong. And we all had meetings on Zoom. That was easy to do. But how do you have meetings in an AGM where you have to authenticate every single shareholder, verify their votes, and take their proxies? That was something no one had done before. And we were able to evolve pretty rapidly to come up with a lot of proprietary solutions for our client, because there was really no exception. I mean, the regulations don't say, hey, you're a big listco, you can postpone your AGM for 2 years. It just doesn't work like that. And so invention came out of necessity. And so
tell us a little bit more about that. So obviously you had to innovate to respond to your timelines, which were immovable. So what did you do? Tell us how you innovated.
Yeah. So actually, to give you a little secret, about over 3 years ago, we developed a software for online participation, online voting. And I think that attracted somewhat of a muted response. But as soon as COVID hit and AGMs were not exempted from being postponed, and regulators wanted AGMs to continue, all of a sudden there was a spike. So what we had to do was adapt our software, and we relaunched it in Hong Kong, where we have a flagship of about 1,300 corporations. And today we're providing that service where we stream on a platform plus also we have the physical, so chairman, CFO, CEO would do a live presentation, but then all the shareholders would dial in via a secure cloud portal to vote. So this was an example where we used local talent, we used local streaming capability, and it was done pretty much in 1 or 2 months. And we had to move fast, yeah, in this regard.
Now, so Lennard, this is very interesting, which also leads me to ask you about your Asia Pacific Board Director Barometer report. So that basically then really sort of highlights a couple of key, I think 5 key areas: digital adoption and virtualization, which is one thing, obviously; board operations, cybersecurity, which talks about this obviously as well; governance, risk, as well as business continuity planning. Could you shed some insights into board concerns and what
Sure.
the real takeaways were?
Right. Okay. So on the back of the work that we did for all our listed companies, we extrapolated that, look, the next area of concern had to be in the boardroom. And if you've been a board member yourself, you would get so nuts every month when the company secretary sends you a litany of emails after emails to say, here's the latest financial, 5 minutes later, the CFO changed again, etc., etc. So what we did was September last year, we acquired a company, we invested in a company called Praxonomy. And with that, we were able to use our domain knowledge as one of the largest company secretaries in Asia, and then to adapt our knowledge with their software. And then together we relaunched it towards the end of last year, a product called Portfolio. And put very simply, what it does is effectively it allows us to store all of the records and the administrative side of a board meeting in a secure cloud portal of choice. So if they were a Singaporean company and they felt that they wanted to host the data in a more friendly jurisdiction, we could do that. And as you know, a company's greatest secrets is usually inside the board considerations, the board meetings. So here we have the audit committee, we have the remuneration, nomination, we have the board, the main board meeting, all of the minutes, all of the action items, all of the agenda, all managed online. So then the secretary doesn't have to do that ungodly thing of, bothering directors, and directors can go in on their iPad, pull down the information from the cloud, and they'll have access to years of board minutes and background. So everything will be kept really nice and clear. And that we thought was complementary to the work that we were doing for the AGMs. So we launched it early this year in Hong Kong, and now it's further expanding into Malaysia and then to Singapore. Yeah.
So that sounds really interesting, because one of the key things is then you add this completely different dimension of self-service to board members. Basically, they can go in and help themselves, and some board members will always be more active than others. So there are some board members who want to go back 5 years and say, hey, this is what really happened. There are some board members who say, okay, just give me my documents. I want to look at it, sign off on it, and that's it.
Well, Brian, here's the best part. In the good old days, the board member would go in and tap the company secretary and say, hey, I want it all single-sided, double-sided, bound, and then put properly in A4. I want my charts in A3. But now the board member can't come into the office, right? If you're in Malaysia, you got MCO1, MCO2.
Yes.
If Japan, you were in lockdown. You're in China, you were locked down. And in Singapore as well, they had a form of lockdown. So now physically, these board members can't go in. And so they've had to find alternative ways. And by having Portfolio, they're able to pull the prior year information on their iPad. It's not paper, but at least they got it on the iPad and they can go back as many years as they could. So, it was interesting. Because of this, we said, look, there must be more people like this. So we ran this survey with the Financial Times. We covered 770 persons, board members. 60% of them came from private institutions. Just under 20% were from listcos, and then the rest were either government or not-for-profit. And overwhelmingly, the key message, if I distill it, there was significant concerns by board members regarding the board operations, not the whole company, specifically around governance, risk compliance, and also around BCP. So they knew that the business was still chugging along and the CEOs were giving good updates, but they were just not 100% sure that because things moved so quickly, whether the BCP plans were rock solid and whether the governance and risk and compliance of their board meetings were secure. So those were the two messages coming out of there. And we were distilling this, and we had a press meeting last week. In essence, there was lots of confidence that we're all going to the new world, right? Almost over 80% are very sure that things won't go back. You know, before COVID, 5% had virtual meetings. During COVID, it was substantial. But here's the key. They now say that after COVID subsides, 54% will still be virtual.
Now, what's on the horizon for the Tricor Group moving forward? What will be a company's focus and priorities in the next year or so?
So we're set up to be a major player in Asia, and we see that there's strong growth still coming from the US, and also I think we're operating very closely with the Chinese markets and also in North Asia and Japan. Our sense is that in addition to the US, European markets and expansion and so on, Asia today has its own story to tell, its own narrative. We see substantial corporations, Asian multinationals, Air Asia, Capital Lands in Singapore, all growing in their own right as well. So our sense is that the world will be complemented by the European, the North American investment, but also in Asia, led by Asia, ASEAN, China, and then Japan as well, to be the major players to drive economic growth. So for us in Tricor, we're expanding. We can continue to be growing organically and inorganically. And so where we find that there are client requirements or client needs, we will expand that as quick as we can to meet our clients' expectations.
Now, Lennard, final question. Now, as a business leader that partners companies in their business expansion across Asia, what are some of the things, given your experience, that you would advise leaders who are coming into Asia for the first time on key things to look out for and do when they're doing business in Asia?
Yeah. So one of the most common pitfalls for businesses when they come out to Asia is to make an assumption that whatever they will be accustomed to in the UK, in Europe, or in North America, that those will be the same operating conditions in Asia. So let me give you a very simple example. As you know, in Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong, these are former British colonies. So the company secretarial, the company ordinance, or the Corporations Act, no matter whichever way you call it, fundamentally is all governed around the same basis. So we could go out, incorporate a company, set up a bank account. You could incorporate in less than a day. But when a business wants to enter into Vietnam, into China, there's no such concept as incorporations. It's actually a foreign direct investment. And so that whole process requires not just a corporation, but it requires a business plan. It requires capital investments. It requires a foreign investment review and approval. And in China, there's a lot of hoops to go through, the NDRC, and then to talk to the provincial government. So those were examples where you first cannot assume that what applies to you back home is the same. Second, there is the second most common pitfall is whatever they do back in the home market, they will extend an expatriate out to those markets, and often the expatriates will make the second mistake by assuming that it should be just like home. And often even the culture when they develop the team, if you have a more North American culture, you're big on, town halls and engagement, which are very essential, very good things. But over in the Asian culture, in Japan and Singapore and China, those would be, those would be received in very different ways. So I think, if I sum it up, not just from a self-serving perspective, often the use of the right tools, the right consultants will get you the accelerated result. Companies who fully understand how to set up payroll, how to get your corporation, how to get your bank accounts, how to fix up labor, social benefit problems, and so on, can really get those business started easily. And I think that's the advice that I would give. And in a world where there's fast, rapid change in regulation, people need to realize that Asia Pacific is not one single jurisdiction with one single regulator in one single currency. It's the most diverse. And Brian, you and I, we live here, we know it. So that's the key message I want the listeners to be aware of.
Lennard, thank you very much for taking the time to share your insights.
Brian, it's been my pleasure. Take care.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Lennard Yong, Group CEO of Tricor Group, on Biztech's CEO Conversation Show. Now, this video will be on our Facebook and LinkedIn sites, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. Thank you very much for watching.